My daughter stood up at my 70th birthday dinner, tapped her wine glass with a spoon, and smiled at the 20 people sitting around my table. I had made the roast myself. I had ordered the cake from the bakery on Elgin Street, where I have been a customer for 11 years. And I had no idea what was coming. "We just want to say," she started, "that we love Mom so much, and that's exactly why." She glanced at her husband. "We've been talking, and we think it's time for Mom to let us help her." She was still smiling when she said it. That's the part I keep coming back to, the smile. "The house is a lot for one person," she continued. "It's a lot of maintenance, a lot of property tax, a lot of stairs, and we think, honestly, Mom, we think you'd be happier somewhere smaller, somewhere managed." I turned 70 that evening. I had been in that house for 31 years. I raised my daughter and my son in that house. I sat with my husband at the kitchen table the morning he was diagnosed, and I held his hand in the bedroom upstairs the morning he passed. That house is not just a building to me. It is the record of my entire adult life. I looked at my daughter across the table. She was still waiting for me to respond. Her husband was nodding slowly, like what she had said was the most reasonable thing anyone had ever said. My son was looking at his plate. I took a sip of my wine. "Thank you, sweetheart," I said. "That's something to think about." And then I changed the subject to dessert. But something had shifted that night. I could feel it the way you feel weather changing, not the storm itself, just the pressure dropping. I should tell you a little about who I am, so you understand why what happened next surprised even me. My name is Irene. I am 70 years old. I spent 32 years as a legal secretary at a firm in Ottawa, which means I have spent the better part of my adult life watching what happens when families don't document things, don't plan, and assume that love is enough to protect them. It is not. I retired 4 years ago when my husband Harold got sick, and I have been on my own for 2 years now. I am not wealthy, but I am not fragile either. My house on Montrose Avenue is fully paid off. I have my pension, my RRSP, a modest TFSA, and I am on very comfortable terms with my financial advisor, a woman named Patricia who has been managing my accounts for 14 years and who I trust completely. I tell you all of this because my daughter Melissa and her husband Cody seem to have forgotten most of it. Or perhaps they had simply decided it was no longer relevant. The birthday dinner was in March. By May, the pressure had become a pattern. Melissa called every Sunday. This was not new. We had always spoken on Sundays. But the calls had changed. They used to be about her week, her kids, something funny that happened at school pickup. Now every call found its way eventually to the house, to the stairs, to the furnace, which she had somehow learned was original to the 1987 build, to the neighborhood, which she said was changing, to me, living alone, which she described as a lot and a risk, and once, in a tone that I found difficult to forgive, not sustainable. I started writing things down after the second call. Just notes, date, time, what was said. I did this not because I suspected anything specifically, but because 32 years of legal work leaves you with certain instincts. When a pattern begins to emerge, you document it before you understand it. You can always throw the notes away later. I did not throw them away. In June, Cody came to the house alone. This was unusual. Cody and I have always been polite to each other in the way that in-laws sometimes are, warm enough, but without the easy shorthand that comes from shared history. He arrived on a Tuesday afternoon with coffee from the Tim Hortons on Bank Street, which I appreciated, and he sat at my kitchen table and talked for almost 40 minutes about a development he and his business partner were pursuing. A small condo building in Barhaven. Permits were moving slowly. They needed a bridge investor, someone to come in at a modest level while the financing finalized. I listened carefully. I asked several questions. I poured us both more coffee. When he left, I sat at the table for a long time. Then I called Patricia. She asked me to forward her everything Cody had given me. which was a one-page summary on unmarked paper with a handwritten figure at the bottom. She called me back the following morning. "Irene," she said, "this isn't an investment opportunity. This is someone asking you for money with no legal structure, no registered offering, and no security. If you gave him this amount and the project failed, you would have no recourse whatsoever." I thanked her. I filed the paper. I kept my notes. By September, Melissa had begun mentioning specific properties. She would text me listings, one-bedroom condos, mostly in suburban areas well outside the city. Retirement communities in Kanata and Stittsville. One listing in Carlton Place, which is 40 minutes from Ottawa and where I know no one. The listings always came with the same message. Something like, "Just so cute, Mom. You'd have no worries." I noticed that none of the listings included what I would net from selling Montrose. I looked up comparable sales myself. The numbers were interesting. A fully paid house like mine in that neighbourhood, sold in the current market, would leave me with a significant amount after purchasing even the nicest of the condos she was sending. I thought about that money sitting somewhere, accessible, while I lived in a one-bedroom in Kanata with no worries. I am not a suspicious person by nature. I want to say that clearly. I loved my daughter when she was small, and I love her now, and I did not want to believe what was slowly becoming difficult not to believe. But I had spent 3 decades watching what greed does to families, and I knew what it looked like in its early stages, when it still dressed itself up in concern. I called my son. My son Brendan lives in Vancouver. He is 42 and works in software, and we speak every couple of weeks. He is a quiet man, careful with words, not given to drama. When I told him what had been happening since March, he went very still on the line. "How long has this been going on?" he asked. 7 months, I said. There was a long pause. "Mom," he said, "I didn't know any of this." I believed him. I still believe him. He was not part of it, but he had also not been paying close attention, and I think his guilt about that has been something he carries quietly. "What do you want to do?" he asked. I told him I wanted to understand exactly what I was dealing with before I did anything at all. My neighbours on Montrose have known me for years. The woman directly across the street, a retired nurse named Gwen, has been my closest friend in the neighbourhood since before Harold died. Gwen is sharp, funny, occasionally ruthless, and exactly the kind of person you want on your side. When I told her what was happening, she was quiet for a moment, and then she said something I have thought about many times since. "Irene, when someone starts working very hard to move the person out of their house, it is worth asking who benefits most from the house being empty." I had been thinking about the money. I had not been thinking about the house itself. I called a real estate lawyer named Douglas the following week. Douglas had done work for Harold years ago, and I trusted him. I did not explain everything. I simply asked him to walk me through what it would take for someone else to have any claim over my property, and what documents existed that could create that kind of exposure. We talked for an hour. He walked me through powers of attorney, joint tenancy, co-signing, and what he called informal arrangements that become difficult to untangle. Then he asked me a question. "Has anyone asked you to sign anything recently, anything at all, even something that seemed routine?" I thought about it. In August, Melissa had asked me to sign a card for her friend's retirement gift. The previous spring, I had signed a form for a subscription renewal, normal things. But then I remembered something. In July, Cody had brought some papers to the house along with groceries. He said it was something to do with Harold's old vehicle registration, tying up a loose end from the estate. He had been apologetic about the timing, and I had been distracted. I had signed 2 pages without reading them carefully. Harold's estate had been settled by a proper lawyer, and I had not thought twice about it. I told Douglas. His voice shifted slightly. "Can you find those papers?" I could not find them. I had not kept copies. This was the single mistake I made in this entire situation, and I have forgiven myself for it because I was 2 months out of grief and he had come with groceries. Douglas said he would make some inquiries. What he found 2 weeks later was not what I had feared most. There was no document that directly transferred anything, but there was a signed letter, apparently authored by me, expressing my intention to sell the property and engage my son-in-law as my representative in any related negotiations. It was technically informal. But if it had ever been presented to a real estate agent or a financial institution, it would have caused significant confusion, and confusion is sometimes enough. I sat with that information for several days. The thing people don't understand about moments like this is that they are not dramatic in the way you might imagine. There is no single moment where everything becomes clear. There is just a slow, terrible accumulation of evidence until you can no longer look away from what it is telling you. My daughter had been working with her husband to position herself to profit from the sale of my house. I do not know exactly how much they owed or to whom. I do not know whether Melissa had ever fully convinced herself it was in my best interest, or whether she had simply decided her need was more urgent than my comfort. I have stopped trying to understand the internal story she told herself. It does not change what she did. What I did next, I did carefully and without anger. Anger is a luxury. I did not have time for it. I met with Douglas again and had a new power of attorney prepared, naming Brendan as my designated representative in all financial and property matters. I reviewed every account with Patricia and confirmed that nothing had been altered. I had a locksmith come and rekey the doors. I updated my will, which I had not reviewed since Harold's death, and I made it clearly and legally explicit that any party who attempted to exert undue influence over my estate would be automatically excluded from it. Douglas also wrote a formal letter, restrained, professional, very precise, to Cody and Melissa, noting that the July document had been obtained under false pretenses, that I was fully legally competent, and that any further attempts to involve themselves in my financial or property decisions without my explicit written consent would be responded to accordingly. Gwen drove me home from Douglas's office that day. We stopped for lunch at a small restaurant on Somerset that we like. I had the soup, she had the quiche. We talked about her granddaughter's school concert and a book she had recommended to me in the spring. Melissa called me 2 days after the letter arrived. She was crying. She said she had made mistakes and that she was sorry and that she had been under enormous financial pressure, which was true, I later learned. Cody's development had collapsed entirely, and they had significant personal debt they had been concealing. She said she had told herself it would be an arrangement that benefited both of us. She said she had convinced herself I would be happier in a smaller place. I listened to all of it. I did not say much. When she was finished, I said, "Melissa, I love you. I'm also not going to pretend this didn't happen. What you and Cody attempted was a serious breach of my trust, and it will take a long time for me to feel safe with you again. I hope that we can get there, but I need you to understand that I am not someone who can be managed." She was quiet for a moment. "I know," she said. Brendan flew out from Vancouver the following month. He stayed for a week. We painted the upstairs hallway, which had needed it for 2 years, and we watched 3 hockey games and made Harold's chili recipe on a Sunday afternoon and just sat together in the house that I'm not leaving. The furnace, as it happens, was inspected that same month. It is functioning perfectly. The technician said it was one of the better maintained units he had seen. My house is not too big for one person. It is exactly the right size for the life I still intend to live in it. I know every corner of it. I know where the light comes through the east window in November and what the backyard smells like in July, and which stair creaks in a particular way that I stopped finding annoying years ago and now find comforting. I turned 70 this year. I have my health, my home, my friends, my son, and an extremely well-organized filing system. And I have learned, perhaps later than I should have, that the people who love you do not need to manage you. They just need to show up. I think about that birthday dinner more than I probably should. The roast I had made myself. The cake from Elgin Street, 20 people around my table, and my daughter standing up with a wine glass and a smile, already certain she knew what was best for me. What I've come to understand is that what happened over those months wasn't really about a house. It was about a test. Not one anyone formally announced, but the kind life puts in front of you when you're not looking. And the outcome of that test depended entirely on who I chose to be inside it. There was a moment sometime in August when I could have told myself I was overreacting, that Melissa was just worried, that Cody was just ambitious, that the papers I had signed without reading were nothing. I could have chosen the easier story. Many people do, especially when the person across from them is someone they love. But choosing comfort over clarity isn't kindness to yourself. It's just a slower way of losing. What I relied on in the end wasn't anger and it wasn't hurt. It was the habit of paying attention. 32 years of legal work had given me that, and I'm grateful for it. I had learned to document before I understood, to ask questions before I accused, to act from steadiness rather than from fear. Those instincts didn't come from talent. They came from years of discipline, the quiet kind that doesn't announce itself. I think about Gwen asking me who benefits most from the house being empty. That one question changed everything. Not because it told me something I didn't know, but because it asked me to look clearly at something I had been softening. Good thinking is like that. It doesn't always feel like clarity when it arrives. Sometimes it just feels like one more question you can't quite stop asking. And then there was the matter of simply not giving up on myself. Melissa and Cody had built their plan on a particular assumption, that I was tired, that I was alone, that grief had made me malleable. I was tired some days. I was alone in certain ways, but I was not done. I had Gwen across the street and Patricia on the phone and Douglas down the hall and Brendan on the other end of a long-distance call, and none of them owed me anything except friendship. And they showed up anyway. You build that kind of community by being that kind of person first. It comes back to you eventually. What I want to say to anyone watching who sees something familiar in this story is, the people who try to make you feel small before they take something from you are counting on you to doubt yourself. Don't. You are allowed to ask questions. You are allowed to make calls and take notes and consult a lawyer and say no, especially to your own children. Melissa and I are still finding our way. It is slow and it is real, and I don't know exactly where it ends. But I do know that I am still in my house on Montrose Avenue, that the furnace is in excellent working order, and that the light comes through the east window every November morning, exactly the way it always has. That, for now, is enough.